in a time where our country is more diverse than ever and more divided than ever.
What is the gospel? This isn't just good news for us, it's good news for the world.
And so when we care for the world, we care for issues that impact the world.
When we study the Gospels, we learn about Jesus' favorite themes. And clearly his favorite theme was God.
The only way you really discover the good stuff of the kingdom is when we let God break apart our mediocre assumptions.
For too long, we've preached a cross that is too small.
We want the Word of God to be proclaimed in a way that people can listen and be changed for His glory and the building of His kingdom.
Good evening, everybody. This is a Seminary Now live event. If you're not familiar with Seminary Now, it's a new streaming platform that delivers exclusive theological and ministry courses from a diverse group of leading educators and thought leaders. Or as I like to describe it, Seminary Now is kind of like Netflix and seminary together. So if you are interested in getting a hold of Seminary Now, getting a subscription, today is the day to do it because we have 40% off on an annual subscription with the discount code annual40. So all capitals, ANNUAL 40, and that expires tomorrow. So get on that if you haven't got Seminary Now yet. I'm Mike Moore. I direct the theology and mission program at Northern Seminary, and it's my pleasure to introduce our teacher for this evening, Dr. David Fitch, whose Seminary Now course, What is the Church and Why It Still Matters? A new look at the mission of the church in a post-Christendom culture. Fitch is a theology professor at Northern Seminary. He lives in Westmont, Illinois. He's married to Rayanne, father of Max. He's written a bunch of books. He is the co-host of Theology on Mission podcast with me. And this is a little different, Fitch, because normally when we do the podcast, you're the one kind of driving the train. But now you can just kind of sit back and let me drive it.
Hey, Mike Moore, are we doing a podcast right now?
Yeah, we're doing both.
All right.
Nice. You have a new...
And this time, you get to do all the work.
That is true. Dave does 90% of the work. I just kind of hit the buttons in the background normally when we're doing the podcast. Welcome. Good to see you.
That was a very humble, modest Mike Moore there, ladies and gentlemen.
I've been practicing.
He actually works his butt off, ladies and gentlemen, for Northern Seminary, for the podcast, for the programs, and, of course, for Seminary Now, right now, that is.
Appreciate that. Do you have a Seminary Now subscription, Dave?
I thought I'd get one.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was going to say, if you don't, you can get it for 40% off with the coupon code
Really?
I just shared. 40%, which is the same as the Blackhawks winning percentage this past year.
Ouch. Okay.
All right. Little hockey joke in there. For those of you who aren't familiar, we like to do a lot of hockey jokes when we chat.
Right. Did you find out if your dad's tuned into the Seminary Now program tonight?
I don't think he is, but I think he's enjoying that hockey game that's happening right now. But
all right.
Moving on, unless there's anything else you'd like to say before we
I think we're ready to
start
go.
warming up.
I think let's roll.
All right. Well, before we...
can I just say it's really great to be here despite all the banter between Moore and I. I mean, we're so used to bantering that we can't stop ourselves. But it's really great to be here talking about what is the church and the Seminary Now course.
Yeah, excellent. Before we get into the questions, we're also giving away a 1-year subscription to Seminary Now and a copy of any of Dave's books. So... the book that we're talking about a little bit today, or his more recent, longer book, The Church of Us versus Them. So if you want to win one of those books and a 1-year subscription, you can just share this live stream on Facebook within the next 24 hours, and we'll draw a winner. All right. if you see, if you're on Facebook, if you look off to the side, look on the bottom, you'll see a chat box. So anytime during the event, ask a question and we'll throw it up into the chat and Dave will take an answer. But before we get to your questions, I'm just going to start us off with a few questions that I've prepared. And I wanted to write this down, Fitch, but I didn't. So you can give me the answer to this equation. So belief plus practice equals, what's your answer?
Well, it depends on what class we're in, but sociologically, belief plus practice equals culture.
Okay.
That's how culture takes shape. Practices,
Yeah.
embodying beliefs, shapes a culture.
So what would you say if I said belief plus practice equals church?
The culture of the church, absolutely. In fact, okay, the better answer, you're telling me I was wrong with the first answer. It should be church.
No, it can be culture too. What I'm trying to do is unpack a little more of your ecclesiology. So in the chorus and in the book, you talk a lot about these two things, belief and practice. You spend a little more time talking about practice. So could you maybe, could you unpack for people who are listening and people who are watching why it is that you are reclaiming the practices as central to the life of the church?
Yeah. So let's just take that as a dictum, that beliefs plus practices equal the church or equal the shaping of a culture. In the history of Christianity, if you look at Acts chapter 2, if you look at the beginnings of the church, it was a community of practices. Acts chapter 2 goes to great lengths to talk about how they fellowshiped, how they ate food together. Mm-hmm. They broke bread together. They gave praise together. They said their prayers together. They studied the apostles' teaching together. All those things, folks, are part of what shape a church and center the people into the living presence of Christ. And they shape people not just on Sunday morning for an hour and a half, but they shape us to live the same way. Reconciliation, the way we eat, the way we proclaim gospel, the way we spend time with each other, especially those who are hurting, the way we spend time with children, the way we practice the gifts, the way we pray together are all part of an entire whole way of life. So church is much more than a bunch of programs. It's a whole way of life that is shaped by practices. Now, if I can just go a little step further, often when we get into a Christendom culture, when the culture around us is Christianized, when people are shaped by a larger culture, the church reverts back to emphasizing beliefs that should be practiced, should be lived out in practices. And what that often does is it shapes us to become, heresy hunters as opposed to disciplers and being disciples of Jesus. And so we have to watch the interplay between practices and beliefs. And in post-Christendom and mission, I think practices become the means by which we lead churches into the presence of Christ. They embody beliefs. They're not possible apart from beliefs, but they're the way we access beliefs. Whereas in Christendom, we often emphasize, what do you believe? Are you a heretic or not? Yes, you can become a member of our church.
Yeah, it sounds like you're attempting to recover some of the practices that have been lost in church. For me, growing up in evangelical Christianity, the big beliefs were read your Bible, witness to your friends, get saved. Those were some of the beliefs and practices that were kind of central to my experience in evangelical Christianity. But in your book, you're expanding the practices beyond just personal quiet time, personal prayer time. You're trying to recover more of a holistic sense of the practices.
I wouldn't say holistic. I would say these practices are social practices, or what Anabaptists have referred to them as social sacraments. Together, they bring us together as a people, and Christ's presence is made manifest among us in these practices. And of course, this goes for the way we eat together, starting with the Lord's table. It goes with the way we reconcile. He says, when 2 or 3 get together, reconcile, and agree, I am there in the midst. You know, all these were Roman Catholic sacraments through the Middle Ages, but they kind of got individualized. And now we've lost their ability to shape us as a people in the world that impact the way we live with one another and give witness to the gospel to one another. So this question that you're raising right off the top, practices versus beliefs, or how practices and beliefs work together to shape a people and shape us into mission, I think is really important question for us who are shaping churches for mission.
Yeah. Can I play a little antagonistic role here and kind of prod and push on the belief part?
Antagonistic? Are you going to be antagonistic with me?
That's
because
true.
If you are, I cannot cooperate because God cannot work through it. But if you're going to disagree with me, that's part of being a people together.
That
okay,
was that was fodder for you when I said antagonistic. So I was setting you up for that. A disagreement
Mike
that
Moore, you and I have been together for too long. This is
it's just
this is just another strange episode of you and I playing off each other in these little
having a phone call
debates.
So a disagreement that I receive often is, well, we can't just all get into the room and just do a bunch of practices. At some point, we're going to have disagreements about belief. Like we're going to have maybe a disagreement. Let's say it's about women in leadership.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate those differences of belief when they come up in our church? When the practices are so embedded in the beliefs, like you said, when it gets to areas of disagreement, then what do we do when the church has a conflict with how we hold those beliefs?
We have been given a practice, a discipline for when conflicts arise, and it's modeled in the New Testament, not just in Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 20, but in Acts chapter 15 and all over the place. 1 Corinthians 3, numerous places. But the first thing to do when you have a disagreement is go to the person directly, face to face. Don't conceptualize the disagreement. That person is that I didn't like the way that person talked about masks or talked about requiring wearing masks at the Sunday morning service. Well, don't conceptualize and say that anti-masker. And then gather a group of people together and go, we're the pro-masker people. We're against all you anti-maskers. Go directly to the person and say, I disagree with you when you said we shouldn't wear masks because I'm concerned about Georgette. She's 70 years old. She has a comorbidity. She's struggling, and she desperately needs to be with us. It's a matter of life, and yet she doesn't feel safe if we don't wear masks. Anyways, I go too long on this, but the point is, it's amazing how conflicts start to break down almost immediately. But if they persist, and George, the guy that doesn't want us to wear masks, can't agree with the guy who does, then we bring another person in and another person just to hear one another. At our church, if things get to be such an important thing that now a large sector of the church body is not agreeing, let's say on women in ministry, or let's say on masks, then we gather. We call it a Friday night town hall meeting. We gather to discuss, hear the disagreements, let the teachers teach, submitting one to another, including the teacher submitting to the others, and slowly we learn. At our church, we try to start with what are the presumptions you bring to this text? And where did you learn them? And out of what social context did you learn them in? And suddenly we begin to see some things we didn't see before.
Yeah.
And I could go on, but I have seen people work out disagreements this way. I have seen people who still don't agree with the general agreement that came out of such a meeting, but they trust the Holy Spirit's at work now in this community, and they can trust this church and move forward with no reticence. That's the kind of church bodies we need today in the midst of this craziness that we're in. Nice. Not only to deal with church conflicts, but to enter the world and all the conflicts that are at work in the world.
It's good stuff. If you're just joining us, I'm Mike Moore. We're here with Dave Fitch talking about his new course in seminary now. What is the Church? It's also a book out with Herald Press. So if you want to get a copy of the book, if you're looking for a free year subscription to Seminary Now, you can share this live stream in the next 24 hours, and we will put your name into a drawing. All right, Dave, I got another question for you, but I'm gonna frame it in a little bit of a unique way. So you got to follow me, okay? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Your book, What is the Church and Why Does It Exist? It's a book on ecclesiology that's framed in the form of a question, or the title is framed in the form of a question. There are several books on ecclesiology, and the title is a question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you the question, but before you can answer it, you got to tell me who wrote the book. All right?
Oh my.
And
this is what Holesclaw used to do to me all the time before. Put me on a spot. Okay, let's go. Let's roll.
But these questions actually fit in perfectly with your course and with the chapters of your book. I only have 2 of them, so I'll let you take each one by one. Okay, so the first question, which is also a book, and you got to tell me the author before you can answer the question. The question is this: does God need the church?
Gerhard Lofink.
Oh, we didn't even hesitate. And you touch on this in your book, but it's a question worth exploring. Does God need the church? Is that a worthwhile question? Does God need the church? What do you think?
Yes.
All right, next question. You want to expand on it a little more? Tell us more about the mission of God and how that relates with God's church.
I believe that God has chosen, because of who God is, to work among us by his presence. This is, as Douglas Campbell has spelled out in those about 5 chapters in the middle of that Pauline Dogmatics book, this is why God needs relational space. By the way, I should probably not say God needs relational space. God chooses by his presence to require a relational space to work in the way he is, which is through his presence. Don't underestimate the power, the conviction, the dynamics to heal, restore, reconcile social spaces through his presence. But we don't give him much of a chance because we never open up space for his presence. This is what the church is. It's the founding relational space that Jesus, through whom Jesus extends his presence by his body into the world, thereby making manifest the reality of his work in the world and where he's taken the world, and all the world can see it and join in. So, I don't know, it's inconceivable that God can work in this specific way that I'm talking about apart from the church. That doesn't mean he cannot work. He can work outside the church, especially for preserving functions and keeping things in order through, say, the government or what have you, but to redeem, restore, transform by his presence, nonviolent presence. God needs a relational space submitted to him, an opening space for him to work among them. And that's, by definition, the church.
Is there a danger that it could make the church too triumphalistic? Like, oh,
No.
No?
No.
Not at all?
I mean, it's a great question. For years, Reformed people, even Karl Barth, was paranoid of making the Roman Catholic mistake, which is we own Jesus.
Yeah.
We own the Eucharist. We own transubstantiation. The priest is the only one. Blah 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 blah. But this is a corruption of the church. I'm not getting down on Roman Catholics.
Sure.
Because I don't believe that's what they believe to be orthodoxy. It's just a fallenness of the church. And by the way, we evangelicals and we Protestants have made a lot of very bad mistakes too. But as soon as we try to control God, as soon as we try to say, you know what, this is one of my favorite questions. So in this book, Faithful Presence, in a couple of footnotes, I go into Karl Barth. Let's see. Footnote 17, Appendix 3.
You found that very fast.
That's because I love this footnote. And Barth talked about this dynamic, okay? Jesus, the church depends upon its relationship to Jesus, in submission to Jesus for its existence. But Jesus does not depend upon the church for his existence, for the Son's existence. And that's called anhypostasis and hypostasis. That's in footnote 17, Appendix 3 of Faithful Presence. So I have this favorite phrase from Ken Hawk Harrelson, White Sox announcer, before he retired a couple years ago. Whenever the opposing batter strikes out, he'd say, "He gone." And I believe Jesus is gone when we try to control him. You can't control Jesus. You can't control God. He's not God anymore once you do try to control him, or if you could control him. And this is why the church can never be triumphalistic. As soon as it is no longer the church. And we got plenty of examples of the church no longer being the church in the United States of America, and maybe elsewhere.
Yeah, well, we'll probably get into that in our next question. That's also the title of a book. Do you want me to give you a clue about the author?
No.
Okay. All right, this is the question. This is the title of the book. Church. Why bother? Do you know who wrote that?
Give me a clue.
I think he used to work at Christianity Today. And back before the Brady Theology and Mission Lectures were what they are now, he actually spoke. This would have been about 20 years ago. He writes for more of a popular audience. His last name rhymes
Dan
with...
Kimball. I believe in Jesus, but not the church.
Oh, I didn't even think about that one. This author, his last name rhymes with Clancy. It's not. It rhymes with Clancy. It starts with a Y.
Phil Yancey. There you go.
Philip Yancey. There it is. 1 for 2.
I'm glad you threw in a reference to the Brady Lectures, Theology on Mission Lectures, because Mike Gorman's coming in September to get our lectures back on task after taking a year and a half off.
That's right.
During COVID.
September 23rd and 24th. Come to Northern Seminary and you can
sign up for what is it, $5?
Yeah.
And you get a breakfast?
If you don't have $5, it's fine. Just kind of come. Oh yeah, back to the question that you didn't know the author too. Church, why bother? It's a worthwhile question right now. When you look through what's happening at the SBC Church, we've seen all these mega church pastors fall. Even our brothers and sisters in the Roman Catholic Church are going through all kinds of scandals. And now there's a tug of war with the Eucharist and Joe Biden and politics. So why even bother with this thing called the church?
Well, frankly, Mike, I think I answered that question in the previous question.
Yeah, but
God,
did you?
Was I too abstract?
No.
Right.
It was It was a great answer, but I had to ask the question because I have the book title down, and it's just
You
just a
wanted
good
to
question.
stump me,
I
didn't
had
you?
to ask the question.
Yes, of course. Hey, I just think, we are in a heap of trouble with the church today. I don't think I'm saying anything unusual. I think everybody knows it, feels it. People under the age of 35, maybe 40, are walking away in droves. We could point to about 50 different reasons for that. Most people know them intuitively, if not extrinsically. So, but the church is the place where if we gather and are led into his presence, we experience the manifest presence of Christ like we can nowhere else experience it. And that experience of his presence is the most healing presence we can ever experience. And that presence is the most, that sense of God and knowing him at work can sustain us. But if we just want to stay home at Bedside Baptist, for sure we can pray. For sure we can know some of his presence. But the manifest presence, by manifest, I mean omnipresence, is God is at work over the whole world. Yeah. We know that. But his presence becomes visible, visceral, concrete, manifest between people. Between people. This is I don't want to make it into a metaphysics, but there are some things that happen visibly between two people. People can see God at work. It's not just an inner, subjective experience. We see him working between people. Yeah. So, the Catholics have always said Jesus becomes present at the Eucharist. Mm-hmm. The bread and the wine become Jesus. I don't know if I think there's some truth. There's some definite, magnificent truth to that. Yeah. He's located right there. Mm-hmm. The Pentecostal brothers and sisters, my ilk, we say the presence of Christ is subjective, internal. I feel it.
Yeah.
There's some truth to that. Us Anabaptist Pentecostals say also that Jesus is present among us, working to change our lives, our relationships, heal us, and actually change the world and all the social systemic mess that we're in right now. He will use us as we enter those spaces. So it's why I understand the church has been a failure, and it's a very tempting thing to walk away and say, forget you, pal. You've abused me one too many times. And I know the feeling, and we need to give everybody space to process the anger and the resentment and the hurt that the church has caused, because it is a human, fallen institution. But this church is where God chooses to work if we will just make space for him, submit to him, and allow him to work in our churches. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's what this moment in culture is all about.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a good way to phrase it, this moment in culture. And that's a good segue to a question that we have actually from one of our listeners, from Gene. So Gene asked this question. Any thoughts about Reappearing Church by Mark Sayers and the perspective of this being a season of revival leading to renewal? And if so, in many ways, not unlike the story of God's people over time. For those who are not familiar, Mark Sayers is one of the co-hosts of the podcast, This Cultural Moment. Oh, and look at that. You had it right there. Have you read it, Fitch?
Yes.
Okay. So to answer Gene's question, what do you think? Is this a moment that's beginning a season of revival that could lead to renewal in the church?
Well, I basically just said that about 2 seconds ago, Mike. I believe this could be a cultural moment. I just see everywhere the questioning. Well, and I don't even know. This may not be a very popular thing to say. I don't even know if it's sons and daughters of evangelicals who can bring us to this moment because there's so much anger and resentment going on that kind of needs to be processed and time needs to be given and worked out. And really we need churches that can provide healing and confidence again. But I believe in the culture there's a lot of searching and brokenness. And I don't even think it's going to take very many Christians for God to do a work of healing. If we can just gather in groups of 12 people, start praying for our neighborhoods and opening space for God to work and heal in the various places, the nooks and crannies of our towns. Again and again, I see examples of, all the racialized problems we have, the racism that's running up and down the streets of where we live. And I see people hungering for healing. But will we have people who know how to open space for Christ to work between, say, police and persons of color who have been abused by the same police? Will we have people who can open space between immigrants who have been abused or broken by the systems and the churches bringing healing? Because these places, I believe, will be the places where God will work to bring transformation. And I pray churches, too, can get through this time. And I like to say that after COVID, we're going to have a smaller group, but maybe a more intense group of Christians hungering for something from God. So, yeah, I think this is the time. I pray this is the time, the cultural moment, for a outbreaking of the presence of Christ among us, healing, transformation, calling people into his kingdom.
Yeah, we talked about that on the podcast, right? Going from measuring church just based on attendance to measuring it based on density. Decrease numbers, increase the density of the church.
Yes, I have a little piece in Outreach magazine that you can Google on that, because I really think we're going to come out of this if we can just tend to what God is doing and not, get amped up to try and return to normal as quickly as possible.
Yeah, having
I was talking to a famous pastor who you and I know, who I don't have permission to quote him on, but he said to me, he said, because they've just started to open up church, this large church, he says only a third of the people that we had before are going to come back and gather like they did before. And we just feel this is an opportunity to rethink and understand the social spaces that shape a church for mission.
Yeah, we're seeing that everywhere. I was talking with a young pastor this weekend, and he said that his church is about 60 people with the average age of about 60, or maybe about 65 people, average age of 65. They don't have a lot of youth in their church. Are you smiling because the age thing?
Not really. I'm wondering where you're going with this.
Yeah, you're wondering where I'm going with this.
I'm on bated breath, just waiting.
Yeah. Well, he and I had different perspectives about it, because his church seats, 500 people, and they have 60 people in the pews on a Sunday. But I think what you're saying here is that actually that could be an opportunity, that maybe God's doing something there. Rather than lamenting the numbers going down, we could actually look and see that God is holding a faithful remnant, increasing the density of the church, and going to use that for his mission.
Yeah, the density idea is that we have less people, but we have more intensity, because we have people who want to be faithful and are seeking God, because they're coming back and they want something real. Yeah. And they're not just here to fill in a time slot, check off something to do every week, their duty, so to speak. No, they are here and they're willing to submit to one another and listen to each other and to what God's doing among us. And I think that's the recipe for a great renewal among the churches in the United States and Canada and elsewhere too.
Yeah, excellent. Well, that's all the questions I have, and thank all those who jumped on board and shared their questions and their comments. But before I move on to the next step of our program, I'm wondering, Dave, you have any final thoughts, final questions, observations for the good of the order?
Do I have any final observations?
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to tease out? Anything else that you want to jump into that maybe you didn't get a chance to talk about your course or about your book?
Well, I think the Seminary Now course, when the peeps at Seminary Now asked me to do it, I was in the midst of writing this little book, and so, and frankly, I just want to say I didn't know when I first agreed to write this book, like exactly what it was going to be. But as I got further, and this is like This is like 6 months into COVID, and I didn't write this for COVID, but I just was able to put together in a very short book, and then the design of it is there's questions that are asked, and yet I did put theology into the book in the footnotes. That I just think it's a really neat, compact, best of all the ideas I could think of in ecclesiology, and I think it's a great introduction to rethink the what, the why, and the how of what is church. Why are we doing it anyways? And how? How do we go about organizing ourselves as the people of God in mission? And I just think we got to ask those questions all over again coming out of COVID. I also think it's very important that we provide social spaces for people to process. So many people are coming out of COVID. They've been in isolation. We've just been struggling. And there's brokenness in relationships that need relational connection. There's deconstruction going on. There's anger at the injustices and abuses in the world. It's like so heightened these last 16 months or however long this COVID thing's been going on. And I just think the pastors got to lead and shape these social spaces for people to talk. They need to be trained how to listen to one another and tend to the Spirit at work in one another and among us, and allow space for God to work in our lives. And if we do just a little bit of this, I just think there's enormous potential for God to work and do something new among us in all our churches and in our countries.
Yeah. Amen to that. If you don't have a copy of the book, it is What is the Church and Why Does It Exist? By Dave Fitch, and it correlates well with our new course in Seminary Now with the same title. Reminder, if you don't have Seminary Now, you can get it. Today is the last day, 40% off with the coupon code ANNUAL, all capitals, and then 40, annual 40, and it expires tomorrow. Thanks for joining us, Fitch. Always good being with you. And to everybody who's listening, we will catch you later. God bless.
Bye-bye now.